to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. A cloudy afternoon, but springtime on the banks of the Potomac. And as we speak, the crisis engulfing the Trump regime rolls on and on. And indeed, last week we saw the crossing of a watershed line through the appointment of the special prosecutor, Mueller. And this past week, even though the entire regime entourage was out of town, on the road, in Saudi Arabia, Israel, Italy, Brussels, and then back to Sicily, Italy. This time we have another watershed which has been crossed, which is, up to now, the inquiries on Russiagate and related issues, increasingly economic links, this question of becoming ensnared in a network of commercial business and shady deals. Those were limited to people like General Flynn, Michael Flynn, who is now pretty much a subject of the FBI investigation, or Paul Manafort, the media darling of last spring and summer, who is also now a subject of the investigation, but they're gone. In other words, Flynn was fired on the 13th of February. Manafort served for several months as the campaign manager, but after procuring the nomination, he was also ousted and replaced by Bannon and some others. So these were people who were no longer in the Trump White House. Now, the news, of course, is that the probe has reached into the White House in terms of current officials, and not even just current officials, but high-level current officials, officials who are close to Trump, and not even close to Trump. They are relatives. This is the headline today of the Washington Post. Kushner meetings with Russians are a focus of probe. The probe now refers in a general way to the Robert Mueller special prosecutor investigation. Subheads: Trump's son-in-law is White House advisor who met with the ambassador Sergei Kislyak and the banker Gorkov of VEB Bank, Vnesh Ekonom Bank, back in December, which is an interesting fact. But the other thing is, he did not disclose it on certain government forms where non-disclosure is considered to be a rather serious matter. So what do we find? This is 4 bylines in the Washington Post. Investigators are focusing on a series of meetings held by Jared Kushner, President Trump's son-in-law and an influential White House advisor, as part of their probe into Russian meddling in the 2016 election and related matters. Now, the related matters, that spreads a rather wide feeler, according to people familiar with the investigation. Kushner, who held meetings in December with the Russian ambassador and a banker from Moscow, again, VEB Bank, is being investigated because of the extent and nature of his interaction with the Russians, people said. Now, last week, a week ago today, back on Friday, May 19th, we were told that the FBI was looking at a new person of interest, a high-level advisor in the White House, currently there and close to Trump. So this is now, as far as we can tell, and this was confirmed by one of these authors, on cable television yesterday that, yes, indeed, we're now talking about Kushner. So Kushner now he creates now this trinity with Flynn and Manafort. But we've also got more material about Attorney General Sessions. And you'll remember Attorney General Sessions, well, did he commit perjury? If you or I did it, it would be perjury. Let's put it that way. When he denied any contact with Russian officials, and then that was in verbal testimony at his confirmation, and then later on, now we're told that in a written piece of paperwork for the federal government, some internal paperwork for security clearances and such, he also failed to reveal what was going on. So this is now a big deal. It reaches into the White House at the highest level. This, of course, is the person, Kushner, who has been assigned the portfolios of China, of Mexico, of the Middle East. He's supposed to be the magician who's going to bring about peace in the Middle East, and a series of other portfolios that he's supposed to be working on. Technological modernization, I think, is one. He's supposed to be one of the principals of the Strategic Initiatives Group, right? Thought to be dominated by Bannon, but actually including Kushner as well. So that is a very big deal. And the White House is switching into a bunker mentality, as we're told. The frustration is great, but the fear is now beginning to increase, because this is now, you're very close to the targets of these investigations, right? And every conversation is now supposedly regarded from the point of view of, if I say this to such and such a person, will they be testifying against me at some early point? Let's just take a look at some of the responses, right? We have an interesting report here by Mike Allen. Mike Allen used to be Politico, went over to Axios, I think, with his friend Jim Vanderhay. So here's Mike Allen reporting yesterday, May 25th, Trump and his street fighters, West Wing officials, the White House, are prepping for a years-long war with investigators and the bureaucracy, with plans to beef up legal surrogate communications and rapid response teams as part of what is now the new normal for President Trump. And that is to say, besieged. A Trump ally familiar with the preparations is quoted, quote, "The White House is embracing the fight, which is going to last as long as Donald Trump is president. We're getting street fighters ready to go." A West Wing official said Trump has been frustrated by the ferocity of the incoming attacks and has demanded a more visible response. And of course, they attribute this to the usual nameless, faceless, deep state types. I'm sorry. There are plenty of federal judges, newspaper bylines, people, former heads of intelligence agencies who have come forward and said it in public. I say that the people defending are in many cases the deep state types. And remember, it's a complicated story, but Comey can qualify in his 2016 version as a Trump supporter who gave Trump the election. So don't start running about the deep state now. You live by the deep state, then you go down to the deep state. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now remember, this is all moving very fast. Practically every weeknight, and even on the weekends now, you're getting important muckraking journalism. You're getting developments from around the world. You have to put this together. We can do it better than just about anybody, but you've got to tune in. And this is work that you should be supporting. There's a certain track record here, and it's convincing, I would hope, and therefore you should support it. So the way to do that is go to americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv, and subscribe. $8 is the normal sub per month, 50 cents a show or thereabouts, and you ought to go to the same place if you want to do a larger good deed, and that would be we have a more generous subscription which supports the activism. And what is the activism, you may ask? Well, coming up this coming weekend now, and let's be precise, we're talking Friday the 2nd of June, but in particular the action is going to be the 3rd of June, the Saturday, and the 4th. So June 3rd and 4th, in effect, at the Left Forum in New York City. This is at John Jay Community College over there on the west side, right by the river, 10th Avenue. 3 and 4 June, yes, this coming weekend. So we'll be there, and we'll have a delegation from the Tax Wall Street Party, the United Front Against Austerity, and other interested parties. Come and see us there. The Left Forum is worth supporting, but in particular, we are worth supporting. So don't hesitate to show up. You'd be very welcome, and there's plenty of chance for discussion, questions, Q&A, questions, comments, criticisms, and all the rest. So make that an opportunity. But in the meantime, get that subscription, become a member, in effect, of the American System. So it's theamericansystem.tv, theamericansystem.tv. The exact time and room of our events at the Left Forum, we will have 2. And I am not able to give you those at the present time, but wait a day or 2. Go to the Left Forum, and you can figure out when and where in the building, right, in this large complex of the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, which is, of course, that's not the Left Forum, right, but that's the venue. So nothing more than the venue. Americansystem.tv, Americansystem.tv. So let's just continue now. The street fighters are being brought in. You don't know how far this goes, right? I mean, you go back and look at Nixon. What did that include, right? There was this hanky-panky with Ellsberg's psychiatrist. There was a proposal coming from Nixon to firebomb the Brookings Institution, as I recall. There were enemies lists. There were dirty tricks. There was the Donald Segretti School of Dirty Trickery, from which certain figures in the Trump world of today descend. So don't be complacent about that. These people are now desperate, will be fighting back, and this could take just about any form. So hold on to your hat. But the main thing is to build a popular mobilization and bring this towards an improvement. So in the framework of this, we're told Bannon is back, big time. You remember last week we looked at the fact that Bannon and Priebus had separated from the main entourage in Saudi Arabia, right? This was last Sunday. And by Monday, they were back here in Washington, it looks like, and already planning this street fighting operation. So Bannon is back. Bannon had been in eclipse, but now it's thought that his brutal methods, his brutal ideology, and this includes the appeal to the most reactionary types, right, the most militant reactionaries, that back. And I would say there is evidence of that even in the public pronouncements. We'll talk about this in a minute. But the speech given, right, the allocution given by Trump at the dedication of the new NATO headquarters, right, yesterday, this beautiful glass building with a winter garden in a kind of greenhouse or hothouse setting, all of that, right, the refusal to pledge mutual defense, we're talking defense, Mutual defense, the essence of NATO, properly understood. Not out of area, not imperialism, not meddling in people's internal affairs, but mutual defense, which it seems to me is an impeccable idea. Right? Hard to be against it. Some other things you can be against, and I have been, and I am, and you can read the books. But I think that was the voice of Bannon. It looked to me like that speech had been written by somebody like Bannon. So Bannon is back big time. They're creating a war room to strike back against criticism. God knows. Communications and rapid response structures, crisis structures. They're back. They thought that Comey would testify this past week. He didn't. He wanted to meet with Robert Mueller first. So therefore they've gotten a little bit more time. They realize now in Trump world that they should have built in more pushback capacity. That is to say, they should have staffed all the posts at the top of the federal agencies, 500 or so, with fanatical supporters, right? People who could go out there and be surrogates, right? Who could appear on cable television, not just this usual round of brain-damaged and discredited individuals. But they're also promising that they're going to compartmentalize and that the greater message discipline will be the result. So the bunker, besieged and otherwise fighting back with street fighting methods. That's the word from the Axios people. Now let's just do a quick review of the foreign trip. It's not encouraging, and we don't yet have the Taormina Sicily, right? We can't cover the G7 today because it's still going on, but I think we can characterize it sufficiently. In Saudi Arabia, it's clear that the main goal was to begin assembling what amounts to a war alliance against Iran. And this means to try to assemble the Sunni world around the most benighted, the most backward, the most reactionary component, which is the Saudi Arabian Dark Ages monarchy, and to get an alliance between Israel and that de facto, and then proceed towards some kind of confrontation with Iran, Syria, Hezbollah. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington. It's the afternoon of the 25th of May, 2017. So we were just reviewing the trip, Saudi Arabia. This is a Dark Ages monarchy. It is not so good to be lashed to this carcass in the face of the youth bulge in the Arab world, right? That's such a large proportion. What are we saying? 40, 50% of everybody is under 30. Somehow this principle of absolute monarchy doesn't seem to jibe well with the modern world. And you'd think you'd be better off with a secular reforming government. Something like Assad of Syria would be more correct. But this is part of the never-ending hatred of the Anglo-American elites against Nasserism, which, as I've often said, I have the honor to represent. And soon we're coming up to the anniversary of the Six-Day War in June of '67. So I'll tell you how I learned the value of Nasserism and importance of Nasserism in Italy in those days of the Six-Day War. So anyway, the idea is to try to assemble the Sunnis and the Israelis, set this up, and go to confrontation with Iran, with Syria, with Hezbollah, and others. And it's a loser. And of course, the speech, I think, was the speech to the 50 Arab and Islamic countries was essentially a tissue of cliches and hollow slogans. The thing that did come across was there's a big animus and hostility against Iran. And then there's also this stuff that he didn't say, nothing about human rights, we're told that Bahrain has just started a big crackdown on the internal opposition. So here we have another one of those Dark Ages monarchies in the Gulf, and they've decided to be even more oppressive than they were, thanks to Trump's visit, right? The days when you could bring the American flag and you touch the American flag and be free, right, with General Sherman, let's say, those days do not extend to the current time. And then, of course, we have this wonderful byplay about the glowing globe, the glowing orb, and other pratfalls. It's also clear that they don't have any Michael Devers, right, to arrange the optics, and the vistas, and the view. So it's an attempt to manipulate, but it's also rather crude. In Israel, we heard the meeting with Netanyahu, and then we heard a kind of pro forma session with President Abbas, Abu Mazen of the Palestinian Authority. Notice, though, in the speech given by Trump, the principal one, he doesn't say anything about the problems of an occupation, because this is the problem. It's going to be 50 years, 50, count them, 50 years of Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, because that is simply a holding pen, right? There may not be any Israeli forces inside Gaza, but they're all around it. It's essentially, it's a holding pen, as they say. It's a concentration camp, if you want. So this problem is the occupation. The occupation generates a resistance, right? And this is the source of much of the grief. The other thing is, the only way out of this remains the two-state solution. And there was no mention of a two-state solution. The two-state solution has been U.S. policy since the early years of George W. Bush. I think it's even pre-9/11 that the U.S. has been for, at least in theory, on paper, in favor of a two-state solution. Trump did get the idea that if he moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, he'd get a tremendous backlash, and a lot of his Arab partners, Moslem partners, would be no-shows at this meeting that he held, right, where he gave this speech. The stuff about drive the terrorists, again, these are simply variations on variations of cliches, commonplaces, slogans, and purely demagogic. So I see what's going to come out of this. And, of course, the guy who's supposed to solve it easily, Kushner, is now a target of, well, not a target, but a person of interest. I'm sorry. I stand corrected. Not exactly a target, but still in the crosshairs of the FBI nonetheless. In Italy, now we begin to, well, let's do justice to the Israelis. 300 protesters in Tel Aviv, 300 protesters in Jerusalem. The Israeli people are not the same as Netanyahu, and you'll remember the young people who had their No Future demonstrations some years back, right? The biggest ones in the history of that country. So maybe they will revive at some point. In Rome, we had the Rome Resists, both in Piazza Bologna in the northern part of the city and at Palazzo Margherita down at the foot of Via Veneto, that storied area, right? If you have seen La Dolce Vita, right, those are the cafes of Via Veneto where a lot of that movie takes place. So they were there, and they were resisting and protesting. We had heard Will Ross saying that he loved Saudi Arabia best because there were no protest demonstrations in Saudi Arabia. I'm not even sure of that. I think there may have been. I'd love to know if anybody has seen any kind of protest in Saudi Arabia, because it's not impossible. At least for a few minutes, you can have a demonstration. And Wilbur Ross, the bottom feeder, is telling us that there were no bad placards in Saudi Arabia. Well, by the time you got to Israel, there were, and by the time you got to Rome, there also were. Notice, though, during the private audience, Don is grinning and yucking, glad-handing, and I think the word is saturnine, grim sober, downcast, right? Not finding this a jolly occasion in any way. And he tried to talk to him about immigration. And the Cardinal Secretary of State, Pietro Parolin, the head of government in the Vatican, also talked about the need to stay inside the Paris Climate Accord. And I think after all is said and done, we've come this far. You can probably survive staying inside, at least verbally staying inside, the Paris Climate Accord. And of course, this is not our answer to this stuff, but we're interested in avoiding breaks, catastrophic breakdowns, splits, entropy, and other problems. And I think that's really the imperative, right? You're not going to get any good policy done now, so you might as well try to focus on damage control. Then, to Brussels. Brussels had a decent-sized demonstration, several thousand, maybe 5,000, maybe more. And this was not welcome. So there they were, and they were very much in evidence. These were the students of Brussels, Bruxelles, or Brussels, and the students of Gand, G-A-N-D, known in English as Ghent. How they brought the good news from Ghent to Aix. And in this case, it's from Ghent to Brussels. The students provided the backbone for this, and they were joined by many other organizations. So this was a healthy size demonstration. Now, this was also the dedication of the new NATO headquarters, a very impressive building, glass building. You walk into it, I guess it's designed to overawe the people, and I guess it succeeds. He gave a speech there which was notable for the omission of any commitment to mutual defense. And we'll comment on that folly in just a minute here on World Crisis Radio. World Crisis Radio. Here we are at the afternoon of Friday, the 25th of May. We remind you, if you want to get a good briefing for the rest of the year, come to the Left Forum. We will have two forums, panels, sponsored by the United Front Against Austerity, the Tax Wall Street Party, and I'll be there. Others will be there, and you'll be very welcome. So please come if you get a chance. And in the meantime, AmericanSystem.tv, a mere pittance, a mere bagatelle buys you the best briefing in the business, I would say, the best hour in the business in a world where this is not so easy to come by. All right, so at NATO, this was a solemn event. It's dedicating this new building, this new headquarters, right? The old headquarters had been in 1967. That was after they got kicked out of Paris by de Gaulle. So they had to go to Brussels, and in 67 they opened up the new headquarters. That is now too small. So 50 years after that one, here we are with this beautiful new building, amazingly striking. See some pictures of it. And there's a kind of hothouse or greenhouse or garden inside the building. So there's trees and grass growing indoors. We have something like that near Union Station in Washington and some other places. But this is quite large and elaborate. And the question was 2 months. The German side contributed a monument piece of the old Berlin Wall, right? Focus of NATO, really, from the 40s until the early 90s. And the U.S. had contributed a twisted steel column from the North Tower of the World Trade Center, right? So these were they're focal points of NATO action, right? Not just to remember. And, of course, sacrifice. Lives were sacrificed on these occasions, right? Article 5 of NATO, common defense, an attack on one is an attack on all, and therefore must be responded to, invoked once for the benefit of whom? For the benefit of the U.S., right? When you're talking about allies, you've got to think not just about how they need you. You've got to think about how you need them. And I would say that is not the outlook of this administration that sees everything as a cost. And we got to think about values, not just budgets and spending. Anyway, the German part dedicated by Merkel, and she starts off saying, well, I lived on the east side of a wall. I was born on the east side of a wall. And it took all of the efforts of NATO and sacrifice and lives to bring down the wall. We don't need walls. We don't need isolation. So this is a clever polemic. It goes from a specific wall, the infamous Berlin Wall, and indeed the German border wall, to a critique of walls in general. It's a very pointed polemic against Trump's demagogy. So we don't need walls and isolation. We need open societies. Our alliance is based on shared values and solidarity. The Trump group was seen looking in their dictionaries for what solidarity means because they don't have it. NATO has to be thanked. She says the German people are grateful to NATO and thank NATO for the help given towards German reunification. Right? This was kept alive by NATO. And we will all contribute to these goals in the future. Okay, now, the answer from Trump is, of course, the terrorists are losers. I can't tell you how flat and hollow and ignorant and primitive that stuff about losers sounds. It's also completely ineffective. In the Arab world, this means nothing. You can be a murderer or you're a heretic. This is understood. But that you're a loser, right, that you didn't become a billionaire, this is not exactly coin of the realm there. So he has to say, you guys have focus on immigration and terrorism. There are other things that they're interested in too. This is before this group of Theresa May and Trudeau of Canada and Macron, the new French president, Rajoy of Spain, Grabauskaitė of Lithuania. So he's there to say, I am challenging you to pay 2% of your GDP for military expenditures. 23 of 20 countries here don't spend what they should be spending and what they promised to spend. And he even suggested that money owed from the past, in other words, if you fell short of the 2%, those would be treated as arrears. This came up in the Merkel meeting here in Washington, and now he seems to be saying it again, that you are owed from the past. And of course, this is not fair to the U.S. taxpayers. Not fair. Hey, Don, how about your Trump care, where 23 million, only 23, get thrown off? Is that fair to U.S. taxpayers? Are those your values? So this was hectoring, scolding, whining. If we'd only had 2%, we would have had $119 billion to work around. He did try to redeem himself by a handshake with Merkel. There's also the scene where Macron arrives, and Trump thinks he's going to be the first, and he's not the first. Macron goes to Merkel, and then Trudeau, and then some of the others. So Trump is stewing in his own juice. Now, the other one is at the assembly point for a photo opportunity. The leaders, right, these are 29 heads of state and heads of government, 29, and actually a couple of more, because I think the European Union gets somebody in the group too. So Trump, as you've seen, right, the shove seen round the world. It used to be where once embattled farmers stood and fired, the shot heard round the world against imperialism. Lexington and Concord, right, the 18th and 19th of April of 1875. No more. Now it's the shove. So who does he shove? He shoves the prime minister of the smallest NATO country and the newest NATO country, and in some ways the neediest NATO country. That is Montenegro. Little Montenegro, I think at this point, a gallant little country that might deserve something better than just to be shoved aside. So he picks on the little guys, right? He's not even willing to shove Merkel or Macron or so forth. And of course, he's afraid of Theresa May, who has given him a tongue lashing about leaks that he's planning already to judo and use here on the home front to justify a crackdown. But what's the story with Montenegro? Most of the coverage ignores this fact. Last October, according to most reports, there was a Russian-backed coup attempt in Montenegro. They tried to overthrow the government to prevent them from joining NATO. And instead, they have now joined NATO. So Trump picks on precisely the guy that the Russians have been giving a hard time. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that uncanny? And, of course, isn't it the action of a bully? I would say, unfortunately, yes. So, again, we'll get the report. Again, get yourself onto americansystem.tv, because on Monday we'll go to Taormina, right? This is, of course, the coast of the Cyclops. This is the area in the ancient mythology world, inhabited by Polyphemus the Cyclops, right, who gives Odysseus a hard time. It's the area of Mount Etna. The god Vulcan, or Hephaestus, lives in the volcano. That's his forge, his smithy, and that's Taormina, right? You see Etna in the background. I've been there, and it's active, right? You can sometimes see lava, molten lava, red, glowing at night. So we'll get the word from that. We also have an outburst against Germany after in the transition from Brussels to Taormina. We have an anti-German outburst. We got to report that here in just a second on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, looking at the situation here in the Trump administration. Jared Kushner, what do we know? Well, let's sum up. I think our insights into this distinguished gentleman begin with a recent article that was published more or less simultaneously in the New York Times Magazine and ProPublica. And it is a lengthy study by Alec MacGillis, which examines some of the shady aspects of the Kushner real estate empire. I thought to be worth $1.8 billion, maybe $2 billion. The principal article which has stirred this interest is the one by Alec MacGillis, May 23rd, this past week. Jared Kushner's other real estate empire. Baltimore area renters complain about a property owner they say is neglectful and litigious. Few know their landlord is the president's son-in-law. So the idea is that the Kushner operation seems to have started in New Jersey. It has then shifted its center of gravity into New York City, Manhattan specifically, but it also has aspects in other cities, notably Baltimore. And you see a bunch of pictures of I guess, white flight occurred in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. People moved into the suburbs. So these are sorts of houses on the level of Levittown, but maybe a step below. They're apartments, garden apartments. Some of them are townhouses. Some of them are single-family homes, but a lot of them are attached. So you get the idea. So this is a very detailed article. I can't even begin to go through the details here about the very aggressive methods that are used to collect sums as small as $3,000 or $4,000. Right? There's constant recourse to lawsuits, litigation, dragging people into court, sticking them with legal fees, and so forth. And it's amazing that judges go along with this. And it's a company that is ultimately under the control of Jared Kushner, and indeed the company is called JK2, so Jared Kushner seems to be the idea. JK2 of Westminster, Maryland is written up here. So the detailed account, rodent infestation, holes in the wall, no hot water, no heat, no response when repairs are requested, things like this, right? So let's read some of the interesting stuff is commentaries in various websites. So here we go. Salon.com. Here we have Taylor Link, and Taylor Link writes, Jared Kushner, White House senior advisor and alleged slumlord. New report depicts Jared Kushner as a ruthless landlord who sues his low-income tenants until their deaths. Reading here from Salon.com. Everyone is fully aware of Jared Kushner's multitasking capability. He's the son-in-law of the president. He wears many hats in the White House. He's a senior advisor, the director of the Office of American Innovation. He's charged with fixing peace in the Middle East. He's also a slumlord, apparently. They cite the Alec McGillis story in New York Times Magazine, ProPublica. They spoke with tenants of low-income housing in the Baltimore area that is managed by JK2 Westminster, the management arm or a management arm of Kushner's real estate empire. So they tell various harrowing stories of people. Some of them, one woman here, the first example given, at death's door, dying of pancreatic cancer, who nevertheless gets dragged into court. She allegedly owes $3,800, but she's brought into court, judgment against her, and then legal fees and so forth. Then it goes up therefore to $5,500. So constant recourse to these lawsuits. Let me just read you a couple of quotes from another one. Here's Slate, the Slate article, Nothing But Slumlords, in quotes. Jared Kushner's life as a predatory capitalist is the perfect symbol of the Trump White House. And here we get other aspects of this, essentially another commentary and summary and political analysis based on this, that any kind of unpaid rent or broken lease can then lead to legal action, even where the facts appear to be on the side of the tenant, according to one account here. So this should all be studied, right? Go to ProPublica. If you subscribe to the New York Times, that's fine. You can find it there. Jared Kushner's other real estate empire. This is not the glamorous one. This is not 666 Fifth Avenue or anything like that. This is pretty, the other end of the scale. This is downscale. So the question that arises, the general impression that Kushner and Ivanka are supposed to represent some kind of moderating force in the White House. Does that add up? Does it make sense? I don't know. But we have to wonder, where does this idea then actually originate? So this is the person that will now be increasingly in the news. All right, moving on to other relevant questions. Another legal defeat for the administration. Very, very interesting. This is now no longer the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, right? This is no longer the allegedly liberal West Coast Ninth Circuit in Seattle or San Francisco. No. This is now the Fourth Circuit, right? This is the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond, Virginia, which until very recently had, if anything, the reputation of a rather right-wing circuit court among the sort of ideological palette of these courts. And instead, here we get an 11-3 vote. 11 judges are in favor of finding that Trump's attempted travel ban, immigration ban, or indeed Moslem ban. The quote is that this measure, the proposed executive order from the Trump administration, drips with religious intolerance. It's dripping with religious intolerance. So the idea is that it is really an anti-Muslim measure disguised as a subterfuge, making it look like something that has to do with terrorism, but it's really not true. So the three judges that voted to sustain Trump, right, to allow the travel ban, Muslim ban to finally be put into action, those are three Republican appointees. The 11, I don't know, but 10 of them signed one opinion. There are actually a couple of legal aspects of this that are, I think, very valuable. Court deals another blow to President's travel ban, and what do we find? This was a court that paid ample attention to the quotations, right, to the various statements, right, where the Animus was formulated. But then there's another opinion that essentially undermines the entire opinion without even going into that stuff. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So we're looking at the excellent work, and surprisingly excellent work, done by the 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond, Virginia. In particular, hats off to Chief Judge Roger L. Gregory. There's somebody who has done something for the country. So the majority opinion signed by 10 of the 11 says that reading the action in the context of the Trump campaign, Trump transition, Trump White House, the travel ban in context, and how can you do it otherwise, drips with religious intolerance, animus, and discrimination. Now, the starting point is a case that comes from Maryland. Maryland is shining brightly here today. The Maryland case, which is what this is, originated with certain organizations and individuals, including a Muslim living in the United States, whose relatives would have been hit by the ban. So a 79-page opinion. The court sides with the challengers. They have demonstrated that they would suffer irreparable harm if their visas were delayed or disrupted. And they would also suffer the psychological harm that flows from confronting official action preferring or disfavoring a particular religion. The judge who wins out here is U.S. District Judge Theodore D. Chuang, C-H-U-A-N-G, in Maryland here, I think in Greenbelt. And he says that this was an injunction, a nationwide injunction issued by Chuang, said, no, you can't enforce the second of these travel bans. So now the district court, the circuit court has affirmed Judge Chuang of the Maryland District Court. So the 4th Circuit leaves that in place. And you'll remember now on May 15th, we had the arguments at the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals, the en banc, at least a 3-judge panel, if not en banc. This was en banc. This was, as you can see, 14 judges heard this. So the one interesting thing here is another judge right now. It's a total of 11 who vote to shut down the ban permanently or as long as necessary. We have, in addition, though, Judge Stephanie D. Thacker. She sides with the majority. She says, yes, you're right. We gotta make sure that the injunction, TRO, remains, temporary restraining order remains in place. But she says we can also do this in another way. In other words, we can prove everything we need to prove without delving into the statements by Trump, right, the Muslim rhetoric and all this other stuff. And she says we can reach the same conclusion without relying on Trump's comments before he became president. Now, this is important. I regard this as a useful insurance policy. Why? Because if you follow these legal experts on cable TV like Tubin and others, the Supreme Court, especially the current reactionary majority, can always say that's inadmissible. You've got to stick only to the document in front of you, sort of like the new criticism, right? No biography, no history, no background, no context, just the text. Textualism, right? Or originalism. There's even a play called The Originalist here in Washington at the moment. Very interesting idea. So Thacker has given an additional insurance policy that if you go to the Supreme Court and they say, no, we don't allow you to read the speeches and the context, then with the Thacker opinion in hand, she's arguing, no, Supreme Court, you can let this ban injunction stand because you can prove it internally. In other words, the evidence inside the executive order is already more than enough to strike it down, to show that it's unconstitutional. So thank God for the Founding Fathers, the checks and balances. We have never needed them so much, and they are in many ways functioning. You'll remember these things like the courts, the federal bureaucracy, yes indeed, the media, the states, the state governments, right? In many cases, the Hawaii and Maryland and Washington State, right? Oregon, that have been behind this, all very important. And of course, the public. Now remember, if you're not going to New York, or even if you are going to New York for the Left Forum next weekend, remember that on a Saturday, next Saturday, a week from the time you hear this, is going to be the March for Truth. And that is really going to be something, I think, this time around. All right, so John Forte. Let's do a commentary on John Forte. This, of course, the Montana at-large congressional seat. It was John Forte against Quist. It's a Republican state. From time to time, though, they have Democratic governors, Democratic senators. For president, they're usually Republican. So, of course, you have to then ask yourself, do you really want to nationalize it? But then how can you not nationalize it? Now, as people know, John Forte beat up the correspondent from the London Guardian. And we have these characters like Limbaugh. Limbaugh is out there saying, oh, John Forte, you're my hero. You're so studly. You're so manly. Yeah, I say, scratch a bully and you'll find a coward. And that goes for you too, Rush. So John Forte can be handled in two ways, and I think this is an important question of political method. One approach to John Forte is to say, Republican John Forte, hooligan, he incites, he's a Trump man, he loves Trump, he's going to be a hand raiser for Trump, another vote for Trump, and Trump incites attacks on reporters. So therefore, Trump is bad. Now, that's all fine, but that's not going to increase the anti-Trump action. In other words, this does not hurt Trump as much as he might be hurt by an incident like this. So I think it's all well and good to say Trump incites attacks on reporters, and that is then imitated down the line in the Republican coalition. I think a much more effective way is to say, what was the cause of this freakout? Why did the guy go berserk? Because he didn't want to take a position on Trump care, Ryan care, before the election, because he thought that might lose the election for him. And that's the important effect. We'll be right back with a little bit more on that in the next segment. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now, we've been looking this week at the British election and the complex dialectic between terror events and political events, especially when the terror events occur in the immediate prelude, the run-up to these political events, such as elections. Remember, there was a terror attack in Paris on the Champs-Élysées the Friday before the second round, the second Sunday of the French elections. It seems to have had rather little effect, but somebody was trying to do something. Now, here's what we find. According to, what do we have here? Various publications, right? This is a poll. It's a British poll. It's a YouGov poll for the London Times. And it finds that the tendency of Theresa May to crater and of the Tory conservative reactionary party to go down, 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 that tendency is continuing. Here's what we found, that when this all started some weeks back, Theresa May had a lead of about 20 points over the Labour Party with its principal candidate, its leader, Jeremy Corbyn, who is something of a leftist. So originally the Conservative advantage was about 20 points. By the middle of this past week, say 4 or 5 days ago, we were looking, Monday of this past week, we were looking at a situation where May had lost half of her lead. It was no longer a 20-point lead. It was a 10-point lead or even a 9-point lead. Now, what we find, that was a poll that we cited on the daily program, the American System. Now, in this YouGov poll for the London Times, we find that the lead has shrunk again by half. In other words, half of the Tory lead was lopped off as of last Monday, and now another half of it has been lopped off. And now the reactionary lead is only 5 points. So down from 20 to 5. This is like a very strong tendency to collapse and to crater. And this is the charming Theresa May, an authoritarian leader, certainly in the tradition of Thatcher, with I think many sadistic overtones. And in particular, we'd have to say that if this holds so, May has always been saying that if she loses 6 seats, 6 Conservative MPs, members of Parliament in Westminster, if 6 of them are defeated, that could wreck her majority. She could lose her majority. There are other parties in play, as we're just about to say. As of right now, Labour would be gaining 2 seats based on these polls, and her majority would shrink to 2 seats. Theresa May faces disaster after new poll finds Corbyn slashing her majority to just 2 seats. This is by Adam Bienkopf for Business Insider. Now remember, this is Madame Brexit. This is the face of Brexit. She represents hard Brexit. Corbyn is supposedly soft Brexit, but Corbyn is so soft on Brexit that he might be dragged back to the status quo. And I think there are a lot of people who are learning through painful experience in the United States in particular that the status quo maybe was really not the hell on earth that the libertarian radio was trying to convince you that it was. So the current finding is that the Conservative Party gets 43% of the vote. The Labour Party gets 38% of the vote. The Liberal Democrats, the third party, get 10% of the vote. Oh, the Nihilist Party, right? The xenophobic, reactionary Brexit Party, UKIP, UK Independence Party, they're getting a measly 4% of the vote. So as we saw in Austria, in the Netherlands, in France, as we saw in North Rhine-Westphalia, as we're seeing vis-a-vis Merkel in Germany in general, the Bannon promise of an overwhelming wave of reactionary, xenophobic, fake populist, cultural populist agitation stoked by billionaires from behind the scenes, enemies of the nation state, like people who want to have a very weak government, and so they can do whatever the hell they want. This is not happening. It's just not happening. Le Pen went down to dusky defeat, and this could happen to May now. So here's what we find. Tories 43, Labour 38, Lib Dem 10, UKIP 4. There are these regional parties, right? Scottish National Party and so forth. So right now it's a 2-point lead. Corbyn is also gaining personally. Now this is funny. Corbyn originally was underwater by 42%. In other words, Corbyn's unfavorability was 42% over his favorability. But now his unfavorability is only 11. So Corbyn is still underwater, but only by 11, right? He's lopped off almost 3/4 of his unfavorability. And Corbyn is now closing in on May personally. May is underwater by 8. Corbyn is underwater by 11. So he could overtake May and become more popular, or at least less unpopular than May. Now, what explains it? Well, Corbyn is forced into a role of economic populism, and this is the big lesson. Mark this well, especially you Democratic Party operatives listening in. We saw in the French election in the first round that Mélenchon, a left-wing economic populist, confused. The program was not what it should have been, but he managed to project vigorously the image of a left-wing economic populist. And what we found was that was good enough to lop off a whole bunch of votes from the demagogue Le Pen. In other words, if a left-wing economic populist goes up against a right-wing cultural populist faker and charlatan, the leftist has a good chance of winning if it's done right. And that's what we're finding, that Corbyn is forced. Now, what has forced him? That May came out with the Conservative Party manifesto. We would call this the platform of the Conservative Party. And what it contains is this idea that if you get a disease like Alzheimer's, dementia, that you are going to be left holding the bag. There's technicalities which I'm not quite up to speed on, but inside the British National Health Service, if you have cancer, that is recognized and they will treat you. But if you have Alzheimer's, which is just as bad or worse in many cases, then you're on your own. So the idea was the dementia tax. The dementia tax was if you have the bad fortune not to have a heart attack and not to have cancer, but if you make the mistake of having Alzheimer's, they're going to strip you of all your assets. Again, your home, your car, your furniture, your gold watch that you got from the company, the family silver, whatever it is, they're going to take all of that and use that to defray part of the cost. So the idea would be that the British, English in particular, middle class would be destroyed under this woman May, the great heroine of Brexit negotiations now, in order to pay for Alzheimer's care. So the Labour Party's been forced to fight that, and look, they're gaining on an anti-austerity basis. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. The time has gone fast again. We were hoping to get to a continuation of the Edward VIII story, and we wanted to at least begin a discussion of the German plan for world domination in the 1930s into the early 1940s. The use of cartels, in particular the IG Farben and Standard Oil DuPont cartel, the aluminum cartel, the networks that were assembled by German diplomacy, Nazi diplomacy, von Ribbentrop and so forth. The use of right-wingers, Franco of Spain and similar people in Hungary or Romania, all over. The role of the Liberty League here in the United States. And, of course, America First, which was Lindbergh. But you got to remember that Lindbergh's wife, Anne Morrow Lindbergh, the Morrow, was a Morgan partner. So it's a little bit like Bannon of Goldman Sachs showing up as the populist leader in the White House and all of his street fighters. And also then the pacifists, right? The people whose motivation was probably sincere and actually positive, right? The veterans of future wars, the future Gold Star Mothers Club, and all of that comes together in the form of what? America First of Charles Lindbergh. So the idea of using that network, people wonder, was the German plan for world domination at all realistic in the 1930s? It was. Now we got to compare that, I'm afraid, to a possible Russian plan for world domination. We're told that there was a center for the planning, the RISS, the Russian Institute of Strategic Studies. We're also told about various secret speeches about how the Russia can simply make a flying leap, a flight forward to equal status with the U.S., all of these oligarchs, right? The current regime there being a kind of a tripartite alliance with the government under Putin, oligarchs that are closely allied to that government, and then mafia, organized crime circles, which are again part then of this tripartite thing. If you say the German attempt was cartel-based, the Russian attempt seems to be oligarch-based. In other words, it advances on this cushion of fantastic wealth. And we were going to comment on the problems raised by the nomenclatura, right? The nomenclatura privatization of the Soviet economy, the state property of the Soviet Union, fruit of the blood and bones and labor of the Soviet people, and how that was simply abrogated. We were going to cite also Gavarukhin, guy that I knew. I guess I might call him a friend up to a point. Stanislav Gavarukhin and his book, Velikaya Kriminalnaya Revolutsiya, the Great Criminal Revolution. That was the discussion of Yeltsin, but then also such people as Anatoly Chubais, who's still around, and the late Prime Minister Yegor Gaidar. The privatizations, right? The massive privatizations. We've also got to pay attention to the current ideologue, right? Putin used to pay attention to Solzhenitsyn, which is understandable, but now it's this guy Alexander Dugin, the so-called Eurasian school. So this is not so great. We're going to do a comparison. This is going to be something you can come and hear at the Left Forum, and we'll be, I hope, able to record significant parts of this. A lot of it has to do then with this question of nihilism. The nihilism of a country where everybody was Russian Orthodox up until 1917, although not everybody. There were Russian Orthodox, there were liberals, and there were nihilists. And the nihilists were numerous and vocal. Then, 1917, everybody becomes a communist, Marxist, atheist, with few exceptions, and publicly almost no exceptions, right? Certainly not during Stalin's Red Terror. Then they go through a phase of liberalism and even interest in the U.S. model, the really criminal policies of shock therapy coming under the Clinton administration. And again, people like Jeffrey Sachs, he'd like to forget it, but he was part of this stuff. That then leading to the current situation of this tripartite regime. But what is the ideology? There really is none, and I'm afraid that the ideology that creeps in is nihilism. But, of course, Russia has no monopoly on that. We have plenty of nihilists here in the United States. Right? Take a look at the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives, and you will see nihilists galore. And they're joined by people who were libertarians but have now gone through so many flips, turning upside down of their worldview, that they also qualify as nihilists. So, looking then at the British situation, the dementia tax seems to have done wonders. In the case of Thatcher, it was, of course, the poll tax. In other words, Thatcher wanted to impose the worst possible kind of tax, which is that everybody pays the same amount. It's fair, right? Everybody pays the same. Yeah, if you have to pay £100 in order to vote or even, have civil rights, that is not going to touch the luxuries of the rich, but it will eat into the amenities of the middle class, and it will eat into the necessities of the poor. And it was fitting that Thatcher fell over the issue of the poll tax. It's quite possible that Theresa May will now fall over the issue of the dementia tax, making everybody pay for cases of dementia so that the entire family becomes destitute, right? No assets will be carried forward by the British middle class. Those cottagers who voted for Brexit, the poor dupes, they will lose their cottages as a result of this if they have the bad luck, or if they're not skillful enough to choose something that's treated more favorably under the National Health Service. So May went into this election saying she wanted a stronger mandate for Brexit. If she loses, it means that there's no mandate for Brexit, and Brexit should be rolled back. In other words, the high tide of anarchist nihilism, of Bannonism, and related forms of cynical nihilism. This cynical nihilism, uncritical credulity, frivolous superstition, irrationalism, and, of course, radical subjectivism, all of that can be defeated. I hope that people in Great Britain have the sense to vote against the current regime. And I, of course, I'm meddling in internal affairs, but I feel like I have some connection to the country on account of the old country, right? The family